Hey, it's your friend John Arcovio. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us today on today's broadcast with Kingdom Discussions with yours truly, John Arcovio. Trust your day is going well. We're just coming off of about 3 days of being really sick, so my voice is a little scratchy today. I apologize, and if I look a little disheveled, it's been a rough few days here, but we wanted to jump on and be faithful here. Welcome, Janice Swank. God bless you. Thank you for joining us. So, we're so thankful you're here. And before I dive into today's topic, I want to kind of set the stage for it. Before I do that, I want to talk about some prophetic training we're doing coming up next month in June. It's going to be Saturday, June the 27th. If you're in the Austin area, you're welcome to join us in person. We're also going to be broadcasting it live, making that available. So I'm going to go ahead and throw the registration link for that in the chat. And it's very economical. In person includes lunch provided for you and also includes your curriculum, printed curriculum. If you are joining online, it's half of what we're asking for in person, and it just covers the costs for the curriculum and also to be mailed to you. So be sure to click on that link. It's coming up June 27th, and it'll be from 10 a.m. until 2:30 p.m. with a lunch break. So we're certainly looking forward to this opportunity to sow into you and to minister and to be covering topics like hearing the voice of God and prophetic ministry. And so that segues right into what I want to talk about today, and that is, one thing that COVID did to the landscape of the modern day church is, number one, you have a lot of prophetic ministries and those that desire, apostolic empowerment that have been wounded by leadership, especially in denominational churches and in settings that are not open to people doing what denominational leaders call para ministry. And that's parachurch ministry. That's ministry that's outside the four walls of a church. And many leaders in churches are very adamant to control everything, and even not wanting to allow liberty in small groups for people to be able to meet in homes, but they want to control everything. Even to the point that the denomination that I was part of, that I left several years ago, actually it's been more than 10 years now. Wow, time sure flies. They restructured the formats of their home groups they had to where every group had to show a set of videos of the pastor speaking in the group and then have discussion about it. No one is allowed to lead or speak. And I understand on one end a lot of pastors' concerns because groups would pop up that would break away from the main body and just want to be their own entity, and perhaps they didn't have a leader that was prepared for that, and it ended up wounding people. I get it. I've known churches, I've known pastors that were dead set, like one pastor that I was friends with in Houston, that there was a gentleman from South Africa that came to his area and attended his church and was acting like he was all behind the pastor and for him and gonna, help him. And then next thing you know, he goes and he gathers about 30 people from that particular pastor's assembly and went across and started his own group and encouraged those people to leave because they weren't prophetic. They didn't understand the things of the Spirit and to come follow him as the apostle. And of course, this put a bad taste in this pastor's mouth concerning the apostolic and prophetic. And I can understand that, and there has to be a measure of accountability. I believe that every leader that is an apostle or a prophet or apostolic, that um, they absolutely should honor um, the uh, the leadership of a local church. I 100% believe in the leadership of a local church, and I honor pastors, I honor shepherds. And so this is kind of the basis of what I'm going to be talking about today, because not only was many what I call Facebook prophets and ministries and social media leaders launched from uh, COVID. Now, it has its good and its bad. I was not very versed on doing what I'm doing today, a podcast. And COVID forced me to learn how to get more professionally set up, nice green screen backgrounds, and high quality mics and cameras and stuff like that, to have a high quality of leadership. Hey, Aaron, God bless you. Welcome. Andrew Hurd. I'm not sure if Andrew's on. Maybe I accidentally clicked on his name. Anyway, just want to say that it produced a lot of people that discovered they didn't have to be accountable to anybody. They didn't have to be in submission and honoring a local assembly of any sort, but they could just operate from their home. And with the advent of how social media, especially, reaches around the world, when you broadcast, it goes worldwide. And you're talking, what, 8 billion people? Of course, you're going to be able to gather, 20, 30 people to follow you. And it just, the prophetic in the past few years has really become the wild, wild west. And especially people that were wounded and injured by ministries, then it's the concept that you don't have to be accountable to anybody. You don't have to submit. And submission is not a bad word. Submission is safety. It's a safety net. We currently are ordained by, and we are submitted to, several apostolic coverings, primarily one that John P. Kelly led for many years from Dallas. Is called ICAL. Actually, it's US Cal is the actual name now. And wonderful man of God, Mark Pfeiffer from Chillicothe, Ohio, is now leading alongside John P. Kelly, and he's doing a wonderful job. And we honor them. And there are different convening elders that speak into our life that we honor, and that's important. And it's vital. But I want to kind of narrow this down, because really the issue is about family. And the health of a good family is that you do have a spiritual father and a spiritual person in your life that can speak into your life. It's vital. No man or woman can be an island. And I come across apostles and prophets that they just, not only they find out they can do their own thing, gather people, and even get economic support without having any outside input or covering or anything. And of course, people come and they say, well, your covering is the blood of Jesus. You don't need the covering. And that's just a knee-jerk response to manipulative and dominating denominations and organizations. Or God's your father. And even talk about Jesus said, do not call any man father. And as an excuse to not have a spiritual father speaking into your life. When you look at the book of Hebrews, especially Hebrews 13, where it talks about how you should obey your spiritual leaders and do what they say. That's not obey and submit to leaders until you get powerful enough that act like you've got us, name someone. We've seen recently the demise of Sean Bolts, and he claimed to be under the care of several spiritual fathers that really had no clue of what they were doing in their life. And even one of them tried to reach out and bring him correction, but he would not honor it. You never reach a place that Hebrews 13 does not apply to your ministry. It doesn't matter how big you get or how many following you have or how many places you speak and And, we still have to honor obeying spiritual leaders and do what they say, because their work, Paul said, is to watch over your soul, because they're accountable to God. And it's important that we understand this is a principle. It's vital. A father's care is beautiful. A true spiritual father is not someone who has a heavy hand and keeps you under their thumb. Jesus, when he was on this earth, he cared greatly about the spiritual needs of his sons. And that was the Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, on and on. And he invested a lot of time into them so they would be successful, so the kingdom of God would be successful and move forward. He spent time to give them wisdom and understanding and knowledge. He taught his spiritual sons about God. He demonstrated to them how to do ministry. He trained them up. He raised them up. And then he empowered them and released them and gave them power and authority to do ministry, and even to use his platform to preach the gospel. And you can see that in Luke 9:1-6, where Jesus equipped them and released them. Even they might have been ready. They were still fighting amongst themselves. They still had an orphan mindset in wanting seats of power and wanting to sit on the right hand, the left, and especially James and John, the sons of thunder. When a city did not receive the word, they said, "Lord, do you want us to call on fire and destroy them?" And Jesus said, "You don't know what spirit you're of." Because true fathers empower their sons, and true fathers give them platforms. So I think it's a dichotomy of why we're in the place we are, why we have so many orphan-hearted and orphan-minded ministries that are, all across this nation. It's, first of all, it's because, what you do is you end up ministering and end up working with people, and to love them and to pour into them and to sow into them. And, and you raise them up with a desire to see them be empowered, to see them go forward and to do this type of work. Desiree Santos, you said you have a question. Absolutely. You can type any question you'd like to in the chat, and I'll be happy to get to it and to answer it during this time. So, it's just vital for protection to have that covering. And we look to Jesus as our example on how to do things. Jesus was the perfect example of a spiritual father. Jesus even called himself a father. Hebrews 2:13 tells us that. And Jesus called to himself sons who God ordained for him and appointed to be with him. We see that in Mark 3:13-14. And Jesus, again, as I said, he gave his spiritual sons access to him every day. Now, his sons didn't have to go through a bunch of hoops to try to get to him, in order to try to schedule time to talk to Jesus, and they had direct access. And I think that right there is vital. I think anyone who calls himself an apostle or spiritual father, but does not give direct access to sons and daughters that he's sowing into, but wants to name how many sons and daughters he has, but they have no access, that's very harmful. That's very, very dangerous, actually. True sons and daughters must have direct access, just as a true family does. My son or daughter can call me anytime. They don't have to go through a secretary. That's why I say the number of true spiritual fathers, sons and daughters you can have is actually limited. It's limited according to the time you have. Now, you can say you're mentoring many, and that's different. But you can't claim to have 500 sons and daughters, and none of them have access to you. Jesus' sons never felt like they were bothering him with questions, because they were given an open door, an open opportunity to communicate. So again, if you're listening to this broadcast and maybe you have a question, or you don't agree, or you do agree, feel free to type in the comment section here, and I'll be happy to address whatever you want. You don't agree, That's perfectly fine. You got a right to not agree. Let me know what you don't agree about, and I'll address it as needed. So, the way we influence people is with quality time. I the When I step behind a pulpit or a platform to speak to a crowd, whether it be 100 people or 500 or 100,000 people, I can influence them in a certain measure with the message and the word. But the greatest influence is when I give my time to sit down with somebody and to sow into them and pour into them. And if I'm going to recognize someone as being a spiritual son or a spiritual daughter, they're going to get my time. Again, leaders who claim to be a spiritual father, but they don't respond to emails or they don't respond to phone calls for days or even weeks because they're busy, this can be very damaging to spiritual sons and daughters. And Jesus understood this. Jesus cared about his sons, spent time with them. And I'm telling you again, if you call yourself a spiritual father and you don't spend time either with your natural sons and daughters or spiritual because you're just too busy, you're not a real spiritual father. You just want the title. You see, I found really there are very few true spiritual fathers. And let's see this question here. I am apostolic for 20 years. Went to ALJC. I was praying and I felt a pull to go back to my old home church. I left with a note instead of meeting. I love it. I love it. Well, Desiree, that goes back to relationship. If you, I don't think it's right. You got to learn how to transition well. And if God calls you away from a church or a ministry, there's going to be a time where you sit down and share your heart with the leaders, and you want to pray that they'll bless you to move on with what you feel to do. But you have to learn how to transition well from ministry. Just giving them a note or sending an email to leave a ministry is not proper transitioning. And it is, it's about being spirit led. And, but again, you don't want to transition from a family of God in safety of covering to nothing. God's not going to have you transition that way. God will transition you into what you're doing, and it's just important that you understand this and you flow. And I'm not all about branding and denominational names, and I'm not here to grind an axe with anybody who was part of a group or not part of a group, but you got to follow after God. No, I'm not in a denomination, so to speak. I am ordained by two different apostolic coverings, and I do honor their authority in my life and them speaking to my life, and that's important. So, if you're feeling a pull to go back to your home church, then you obey God, Desiree. There's a reason for that. If God's leading you to do that, then it will enhance you and bless you. And there are many, many pastors of denominations that are good men, and they're good leaders. And if that's what God's leading you, then go be faithful, support them, honor them. And that's the big thing is if you cannot, it's why you be careful what you join yourself to. Be careful who and what you submit yourself to, because if you are not willing to submit to authority, God's not going to bless you bucking authority. It doesn't matter, so be careful about going and not researching out and making sure that you're able to submit to and honor whatever group you're joining with, whatever spiritual family you're connecting with, because God never, ever, ever honors those that resist and buck authority. And if there's a group that they have certain rules or things they call standards or things they want you to do that you're not able to, then do not make that mistake of thinking you're going to come in and change them. That God's not going to bless you in that. I was very, very careful about who Jennifer and I selected to honor as a covering in our life, because we choose clearly to honor and to cover, and so, I avoid religious atmospheres. And yes, Desiree, legalistic atmospheres. You got to choose to honor and respect authorities and avoid religious and legalistic attitudes. So let's get back to my discussion about a true spiritual father. True spiritual fathers, they sow into sons and daughters. False spiritual fathers never share their platform, and even if they do, it's always controlled. They'll require a son to give them a detailed account of the message they're going to preach before he even allows them to get up and share it. Or worse off, complete lineup. This is what I want you to say. This is what I want you to speak. The wannabe spiritual fathers of this age, they want sons and daughters to preach what they tell them to preach instead of allowing them to hear from God and to flow and to preach what the Lord desires. That doesn't mean that if you're in a series, there's nothing wrong with asking somebody. I've asked people that were part of our ministry. They were going to speak on that Sunday. I would say, here's my notes on what was going to plan on speaking this Sunday, and I'd like to continue in this series thought, but feel free to add to it, take away, do whatever you feel. Because if I'm going to trust them to get up and speak, I'm going to trust them to minister and to speak as led of the Spirit and not dominate them. Jesus, when he sent his sons out in the Bible, he didn't tell them what to preach. All he said is, as you go, preach, saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And if Jesus can trust the 12 disciples, that were a motley crew. They were very immature. Look at their attitudes and their responses. But Jesus trusted them, because false spiritual fathers may allow a son or a daughter to step in their platform and minister, but they never fully give them the inheritance. They may do it out of obligation and not genuine love to see that son or that daughter to truly excel and be blessed. Jesus believed in the ones that no one else believed in. Jesus took the ones who wouldn't make the cut in formal ministry or have formal training and transformed them into the most powerful and greatest ministers of that age. My heart is, I want to be a true spiritual father that believes in sons and daughters and does get the best out of them. And the reason why, if I'm a true spiritual father, I'll get the best out of those that I'm raising up and empowering, is because I treat them the best. When you look at Jesus, one of his main priorities was not building his own brand, his own name, and his own ministry, but he gave himself to building others. If you find a house that has a spiritual father that's committed to raising up and building others, that's a good house to be part of. Being a spiritual father is not just a title, it's a lifestyle. Jesus, every day he lived on earth, worked diligently to see the life of God established in other people. This could only be done out of a deep and personal relationship with his sons and daughters. So again, any father or so-called father that is not willing to spend time with sons and daughters like Jesus did is not a father at all. I spent a brief time a part of a network. It was an apostolic prophetic network, and I really desired to for the leader just to have a coffee with me. And for 2 years, while I lived in that area, I lived 45 minutes from this leader. For 2 years, I asked over and over and over, just tell me the time and date. I don't care if it's at 11 o'clock at night, 5 in the morning, I'll meet you for coffee. Just to be able to glean, and he never had time for that. And finally, after about 2 years, he had his secretary send me a letter saying, as of now, and he named one of the upcoming ministries that was working under him, he's going to be your apostle and your spiritual father. Well, my challenge was, I felt there were some major things wrong with this leader. It was later on, it became revealed it was true. There were some deeply disturbing issues with this leader. And I just like, wow, this is not true kingdom. And it really left a bad taste in my mouth, but let me know, God, don't ever let me be a fake father. What's a fake father? Fake fathers don't even put the effort to spend time with their sons. And again, they're nothing but fakes. All they want is the title and the recognition to be apostle or father, like the Pharisees did. And you read in Matthew, 23 verses 1 through 12. Jesus dealt with this. And of course, that's what Jesus was saying, where he warns in the scripture, don't call leaders by the title father, who simply desire to be titled as a form of honor before men. That's why Jesus told them, call no man father, because it was just a title. It was just a fake one. Hey, Charles Jennifer. Charles Jennifer is actually Apostle Babu from India, and he is a true son. I honor him. And hey, Apostle Babu, now that I've got your attention, I need you to sit down with your son, your natural son, and your daughter, and I need you to write up a 1 or 2 page business proposal for what we can possibly do to help generate income for the ministry there in India. And I'll send you an example of a business proposal if you'll do that. Sorry, folks, I'm taking care of business here, but I've been talking with my son about getting a way to build a residual income to help the ministry in India. So God bless you. And yes, I love you, Babu. You're a true son in the gospel, and I honor you. So true fathers release sons in ministry. Jesus, he released sons who were not fully mature. Sons that were still arguing who is the greatest. And yes, you need to have sons that develop into healthy ministry. And yes, a certain level of maturity must be attained before a son is truly released into ministry. But Jesus understood that if one had to be perfect to be in ministry, then no one would be in ministry. I certainly wouldn't be in ministry. I'm not perfect. And he knew this group of sons were going to continue abiding in the presence of God until they attain that place of spiritual maturity. Therefore, I believe this is why Jesus trusted them with ministry. Let me tell you what the challenge is. The challenge is control. Control. Any issue that ever takes place in politics or religion, the issue is never the issue. Control is always the issue. You can be guaranteed that, no matter what they're harping on. People that harp about this and that, it's really all about who's controlling things. The challenge is controlling leaders can never trust sons with true ministry. These type of fathers will always overlook their own faults and flaws and see all the faults and flaws of their own ministry. Yeah. So, it's really, really important that we understand we all are standing in a place of love and standing in a place of needing grace. Amen. You cannot justify faults in your own life while ignoring faults in others. So, of course, fathers that have sons in the natural, many times I've seen nepotism where that son will always be ready for ministry in their eyes because of the desire to control things through a family brand. Even if that son, like the sons of Eli, are not doing right in the eyes of God, they'll always be right. Because why is this? Why does this happen? Where leaders empower sons that are not fit for ministry. It's about control. Again and again, false spiritual fathers always do things according to the flesh, not according to the spirit. So Jesus treated his sons as though they were more mature than they really were. And I believe because he did this, this helped bring them into greater levels of spiritual maturity. They matured rapidly because he treated them with respect and trusted them. I've seen spiritual fathers that were false, that couldn't even honor and treat sons well, even though they were mature and they were ready. But they talked down to the sons, tried to make them feel low and insignificant. They could never get it right in their eyes. And, because false spiritual fathers do not have the ability to treat their sons with true respect. Oh, they demand for those sons to honor them and treat them with respect. But I believe the reason why most spiritual fathers don't have the ability to be a true father is because they were never a true son themselves. And that's the principle in the kingdom. You can't be a true spiritual father or mother until you learn how to be a submitted, obedient, and honorable son and daughter. This is what creates orphan-minded, so-called spiritual fathers and mothers and apostles and leaders and things of that nature. So I'm going to close with this thought. Even Jesus trusted to the point of trusting those that were not trustworthy. What are you talking about? Jesus gave Judas the responsibility of overseeing the money, the bag. You can't tell me Jesus didn't know that Judas was deceitful and a thief. Jesus could have placed two of his sons to be in charge to watch Judas collecting and counting and distributing these ministry funds, but he didn't. Why did Jesus trust Judas, who not only was a thief, but they would eventually betray Jesus? I believe Jesus knew that Judas would betray him, because when Judas kissed him on the cheek, he said, "Go, whatever you do, do quickly." He knew what he was doing. But this is the remarkable spiritual leadership of a true father. And it's probably hard for us to really understand. The controlling spiritual father would have a hard time even trusting the most honest of sons. But the same spirit that Jesus moved in, that empowered a Judas, produced a Peter. He chose to trust. He chose to empower. You see, I believe one of Jesus's focuses was to see God's destiny come to pass in his spiritual sons, even those that seemed to not deserve it. He believed in and supported his sons so God's will could be accomplished through them, even though he was hurt and betrayed by Judas. So I pray that God will raise up true spiritual fathers in this hour. And that those of you that are out there that perhaps you've been wounded by ministry or disillusioned by false fathers, that God will direct you into pastures that you can feed in and be strengthened and loved and encouraged and empowered to reach the full assignment and the full destiny that God has called you to. Let me pray for you. Father, right now, I just pray for every single person that has been on this podcast. Regardless of what background they come from, what church they attended, what kind of leadership they've been under. If they've been under abusive leadership or a false spiritual father, guide them into green pastures, into a place of rest, into a spiritual family that can strengthen them and bless them. And so, Father, I just ask in your name that you just allow these words today that have been spoken to bless others. God bless you. Shalom. I'm going to put the link back in there if you want to join us next month for our 4 hours of teaching and training. That's going to happen both in person and online on June the 27th. Please click on the link and join. And God bless you. We love you. Thank you for joining us today, and have a beautiful day.